Welcome back to the Loud Little Ducky. Still in the Karen Reed case. We have Judson Welcher is who we are going to talk about in this video. And before Dr. Judson Welcher, I don't know what his doctorate's in, otherwise, unless it's in like physics and science and biomechanical engineering. I don't know. But um, Alessi is allowed to do a small voir dire, um, and Alessi talks to him about him changing his PowerPoint, um, that he had gotten in the Sunday before, uh, last Sunday, when he testified. So he'd been there for several days, if not a week already, at that point, and that Tully picked him up from the airport because Tully has been involved in everything, seemingly. Um, Even when Proctor was on the case in the first trial, I think Tully was the one that was in all the meetings with witnesses, um, with the Commonwealth and things like that. Um, Hank Brennan, when they met up, went through the PowerPoint with him. Um, the changes to the PowerPoint were initiated by Brennan. And I don't know if that's Brennan making him change things or if that is, like, due to the court and the defense's objections, and that's why there's changes. Um, they He also took out a slide from his PowerPoint, a Dighton slide, or it changed, about 8 to 10 days ago. He does know about Burgess's CV resume issues, because he received multiple emails. He did open at least one, because it looked professional. So he opened it and then he was like, oh, I'm not supposed to be reading this because of the sequestration thing. So he didn't read anymore. Whether I believe that or not, I don't know. Um, he is apparently a VP of Aperture in some shape or form. I don't know what he's VP of or if he's just VP of the entire company. I know that he doesn't work at the same branch, as Burgess does. Um, and remember, Aperture is just an accident reconstructionist consulting firm, that they have a bunch of different people that can look into things like that. I don't know if they're salary employees or if they are general contractors through there, but um, that's kind of how that works. Um, he says that he is going to make testimony changes due to Burgess putting out that May 8th report about the timeline shifting 21 to 29 seconds, um, which wasn't in his original plan. He and then he says that by them doing this timeline adjustment, clock adjustment, it brings it closer to Whiffin's data. And he says that Burgess's data was better from his May 8th report from his previous report. And those were the changes. So then the jury is brought in, and Hank Brennan is on direct. talks about, he's an accident reconstructionist. He does know about EDRs, which is the tech stream data or maintenance data. Um, a lot of people think that that's the same as black box data, or it is the black box data, but the infotainment center is different. One of those is the black box data. I don't know which is which, but either way, it's about event data recorder. And the reason that cars have this event data recorder is for the car's maintenance. So that if they need to run something and they see triggers, it tells you what has been going on with the car. He says that he has no dog in this fight, but his mannerisms make me think otherwise. Um, he likes to argue a lot. Um, he can't ever just say yes or no. He has to turn it into something, and it's his way or the highway is how he sees it. He, to me, thinks that he's the smartest person in the room, and which is really odd when he's gonna go up against a lessee, but seems a little arrogant. He says, "Oh, I have no dog in this fight." He doesn't care who he testifies for or about. He doesn't care. He just wants to look at the data and be a good engineer. Just be a good little boy. Um, he bought a Lexus for testing, an exemplar Lexus, which is the same make and model, and they compared the data of the two to see if they are basically alike, and everything seemed to match up. Which we're like, "Oh, well, that's cool. You can do this testing." And at this point, we don't really know what his tests are gonna be. We're like, "Okay." He bought an exemplar Lexus so that he can show us how this taillight shattered and ended up on a lawn and giving us the abrasions to John O'Keefe's arm. So we're like, "Okay." Kinda expensive, but we figure out that, that's okay. Um, he does say that on September 23rd, 2024, he did go and inspect Karen Reed's Lexus and John O'Keefe's, Chevy Traverse vehicle, and he measured them. He was in, around, on top, underneath, um, these vehicles to get these measurements, because he was going to do, like, or not was going to, he did. He needed measurements and photo photogrammetry or whatever to do, like, 3D or 2D imaging of the scene, to do some recreations. We'll look at a little bit of that, here in a minute. And he said that when he looked at Karen Reed's Lexus, the casing of the taillight was taken out, which we knew that that was taken out. Um, and basically the odometer reading was about 12,666. We know that when uh it wasn't at that. It was at that 12,666 or 12,665, was the odometer when Karen Reed's vehicle was in the Sallyport as of February 1st. Um, he talks about that the vehicle will not register a pedestrian strike, um, especially with the way this one went down, um, a 6,000-pound vehicle versus John O'Keefe, who's about 216 pounds, it's not going to register that. Many other witnesses has said the same thing, that it's just not enough force impact to make it say anything um, in the data of the vehicle. But it also didn't register the collision, of Karen hitting John's Chevy Traverse either, so that wasn't enough force to throw some kinda code or something, into the vehicle data either, um, saying, that the vehicle to John O'Keefe, if that's how it happened, wasn't considered by the car to be a significant impact, um, even though to us it's significant, but to the vehicle, it was like, "No, it's not even it's barely nothing." Um And then he gets into talking about, um, the different miles, between different locations, um, because the way he got to 1162 was going off of the odometer reading from when it was in the Sally port for February 1st, which should have been the same thing as January 29th, 2022, when they brought it in, and then he subtracted mileage to get to key cycle 1162, um, which I don't know if that's a proper way to do it. I don't know why he didn't just go by trips, um, and we're gonna pull up his calculations. I also did my own calculations, and then I'm gonna kinda combine our calculations because it seems like he might have some information about Karen Reed going some places before she went to Jen McCabe's, um, that I did not have. Um, but it's interesting to see the 3 different results in where they would land, in getting to that odometer reading. I still don't think that that's how he should have done it. I think it should have been done by key cycles and things like that, but this is the way he did it. And unless he tried to question him about this in his cross, but still for some reason, I don't know if it's Bev or or the witnesses and the way they're answering, but the defense cannot seem to get to people acknowledging how key cycles work in this case. And ARCA doesn't talk about the key cycles either because ARCA is basically just there to say collision didn't happen. They're not really talking about the data, and neither did DeSogra. He didn't talk about key cycles either. Um, so I don't know why they're not doing it. I've done videos on the key cycle and how I think they went down and where I think those are at. But we're gonna look at it the way that Welcher looked at it. So let's bring that up. Um, we are gonna bring up first, I wanna bring up my calculations and how I think it would look. So here we have, like I said, we have at the top the odometer reading at 12,665. We don't have a time for that. And then interesting enough, 1162-1 for the three-point turn and the 1162-2 backing maneuver both were in the same mileage of 12,629 miles. And then the difference in the odometer readings from the Sallyport at Canton PD and the 1162 key cycle is a difference of 36 miles. And so that's what Welcher was talking about is he basically added mileage backwards to get this 36 miles. That's an interesting take. Another thing that's interesting is that the time that the three-point turn was 10 minutes and 57 seconds into the driving of Karen Reed's Lexus. And then the backing maneuver was 19 minutes and 2 seconds into the driving, with a difference of 8 minutes and 4 seconds between these two, which is odd because for some reason, in 8 minutes and 4 seconds, this vehicle didn't even go a mile because it's still at the same odometer reading, which I thought was interesting too. Something is weird with these data points because they don't make sense to me. But that would be the difference. And then this would be the mileage if you subtract it. But there's no movage in mileage, but there's 8 minutes in between these two events. So I don't know. I guess the car was sitting still. So I during that 8 minutes, and that's why it didn't change. Which could that be her sitting outside waiting for John O'Keefe? I guess, that she waited 8 minutes for him to come out maybe? Um, that's if 1162 is in fact at 34 Fairview, but according to Welcher, that's where it is, so that's what we're gonna discuss in this. And so then I did my calculations to see if we subtracted based on mileage of, an odometer reading. We wanna go back 36 miles according to Welcher. So I put in pulling into the Sallyport and the Lexus getting on the tow truck. Of course, that's way less than, 1 mile. Um, and then to my knowledge, the car went from John O'Keefe's house to Dighton at around 1:30ish, and that was gonna be about 29 miles. We also knew that before this, um, Karen had gone when they dropped the car off, Jen's to John O'Keefe's house. That was about 2.4 miles, around 5:45ish in the morning. We have when Karen left John O'Keefe's house to go to Jen's at around 5:07 AM, basically. So that's gonna be another 2.4 miles. And then when she went from 34 Fairview to John O'Keefe's house around that midnight, 30, 12:32ish, 12:30 time, it would have taken 2.3 miles. So then when we basically add all these up, we get to about 36 miles by my calculation. So I would agree that if we backtrack 36 miles, my math goes pretty almost on point. But Welcher's timeline is a lot different than mine. 'Cause so let's bring up Welchers, and we're going to bring that up. Okay. All right. Here's Welchers. I still have this odometer reading that there's a 36-mile difference in the odometer readings from when it's at the Sally Port to 1162 key cycle. Um, but he had in here, I just put in pull into Sally Port and get on the tow truck. But he had 34 Fairview to John O'Keefe's house at 12 a.m. and it would have taken 2.6 miles. Okay. Then then he had John O'Keefe's house to the waterfall at which is 1.3 miles at 5 a.m. So I don't know if Karen's phone shows that data and that's where they're getting this from, that the car did this, but okay. And so before getting to Jen's house, Karen Reed went by the waterfall looking for John. All right. Then from the waterfall, John's not there, I guess. And then Karen Reed goes to Jennifer McCabe's house. So the waterfall to Jen's is 2.6 miles at about 5:30ish. Then and he did these on suggested times, what the traffic would be like and the mileage and stuff, and it doesn't take into weather consideration for the time travel at these suggested times. He's not saying these are the times that all of this happened. These are just these suggested times so that he could get the traffic and mileage from that point. Although I don't think if you change the day or the time, it's going to affect the mileage. It is just going to affect how quickly you can get there, in my opinion. But whatever, that's the way he did it. Um, a- and then he brings the going from Jennifer McCabe's house back to John O'Keefe's house when Carrie Roberts and Jennifer McCabe and Karen Reed all drop off Karen Reed's Lexus. Um, that was gonna be 2.4 miles at around 5:45 a.m. Then John O'Keefe's house, um, when Karen Reed drove from John O'Keefe's house to Dighton to her parents' house at around 1:30 p.m., um, that was 29.1 miles. So these are Welcher's data points approximately. He had some different routes and stuff. I kinda tried to just pick one in the middle or one that matched mine that was also in his slide presentation, and you get about 38 miles, which we're looking for 36, but his calculation puts it at 38. Is it close enough? But when we're dealing with numbers, do we need to be exact? Um, so he has different points in here that I didn't have in my timeline. Our timelines are different on vehicle, but I don't have the data in front of me. I'm just going by vehicle movements that we know of. All right. So let's remove Welchers. All right. And then we're going to bring up the combined of my data that to me, Welcher excluded and and then add to mine that I didn't have included to get a combined total of what the night apparently actually looked like. So let's bring that up because this to me should be a more accurate and precise timeline. Again, we're trying to get to a difference of 36 miles if we're going from Sallyport to making 1162, Karen Reed being at 34 Fairview. Um, and we're working, and I work backwards. Obviously, pulling into the Sallyport and getting on a tow truck, less than 1 mile for sure. Even combining them together, it's less than 1 mile. Sallyport, it got there on at 5:30 p.m. on the 29th. The car Lexus got on the tow truck at 4:15 p.m. Um, and then going backwards, um, Karen drove from John O'Keefe's house to her parents' house in Dighton for approximately 29 miles, and she did that around 1:30 p.m. Before that, the car was driven from Jennifer McCabe's house to John O'Keefe's house, which is approximately 2.4 miles at around 5:45 a.m. Adding in the waterfall to Jen's at 2.6 miles at 5:30, John O'Keefe's house to the waterfall, because I guess she made pit stops along the way. Um, and we know if she did these pit stops, she also did not turn off her car during these because it showed it running all this time. And so we know there's not just because we have these doesn't wouldn't mean that our key cycle analysis by judging it based on that would be inaccurate because her car was still running throughout these pit stops. She didn't go to the waterfall and then turn off her car and then start it back up and then go to Jen's and so forth. I know some of this is confusing, but that's why I wanted to have charts so that if for some reason the words are confusing, you can visually see it. And then, so that's 1.3 at 5 a.m. And then obviously when she drove from 34 Fairview to John O'Keefe's house at that 12 a.m. to 12:32 a.m., and that was 2.6 miles. So when we total all of the miles for things in my timeline that should be included and things that are in Welcher's timeline that obviously should be included, we get about 37.9 miles, which is still over this 36-mile difference. So, how important are these numbers? This is why I think we should know somebody needs to know how to read this data. And if whether we do it by key cycles or we do it by odometer readings, I feel like we should end up at the same spot. But for some reason, we don't. So I don't understand that. And I don't know if it's because numbers are plugged and this is not actually the real data. They're just taking the reports of Trooper Paul, who I don't know if he wrote his report right or if that's actually how the report just comes out looking like. I don't know how this data was recovered, but things aren't lining up. But, you know, we have an idea of how they're getting to this 1162 being um, Karen Reed at 34 Fairview. Whether I agree with it or not, that is what is being talked about. So they got into all of that. Um, then he says that the 3-point turn, no, not the 3-point turn, the reversing backing maneuver. He says that when this is when they're claiming John O'Keefe is getting hit, that Karen Reed was where she was, somewhere in front of 34 Fairview. We don't know. Can't pinpoint that exact location. Even though there's longitude and latitudes, we should be able to plug those in and see exactly where that's at. But that she drove forward 34 feet. Then she reversed back to where she originally was and then went an additional 53 feet back. So her total backing in reverse was 87 feet total, which is interesting because during the time that they're saying this happened at this 12:32 time or 12:31, whatever timeline number they want to put on it, Ryan Nagel in this trial has put himself between 12:30 and 12:35. Whether that's actually when he was there or not, based on text messages, it seems like he wasn't there at that time. I don't know. But to this jury, Ryan Nagel and Heather Maxton and Ricky D'Antano were there between 12:30 and 12:35, did not see this happen, and they were parked behind Karen Reed's Lexus. And then you also have that Brian Higgins' Jeep was at 34 Fairview as well. So there's possibly 1 to 2 cars behind Karen Reed's vehicle. But he talks about and then nobody saw John O'Keefe get hit by a car. Karen Reed pulled up 34 feet and then as a total went at 87 feet backwards, never hitting any vehicles behind her that should have been there during this time period. That her foot was 74% down on the accelerator, and that during this time period, the miles per hour was 13.67 miles per hour going to 24 miles per hour, possibly in point 0.5 seconds, which seems weird. He does talk about wheel slippage. Um, and that's an interesting thing too, because while you're saying she does all that, and that's the time period that they captured, mm, 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 I wanted to see if I was trying to see if in the data it where it was traveling. Um That's not distance traveled. Okay. Let's bring this up just to show you when they're talking about some distance traveled and what his little Excel spreadsheet looks like. Mm, Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So we have the blue is what he did, the black is how the data comes out. And so you can see vehicle speeds and so it's got these miles per hour in here. And then it talks about distance traveled, that these were in reverse. And um, I think this is his testing on the exemplar. And I'm not really sure. I don't know what negatives mean or positives. I don't know if that's means that it's going backwards at that speed, like it's going in reverse 8 miles per hour, 12 miles per hour. I have no idea. But for anybody that does understand these things, this is what apparently showing the miles per hour, feet per second, distance traveled, 74% on the throttle, and then here are the RPMs and 0 brake oil pressure or and telling you if it's in neutral, in reverse, or if it's in drive. Um, and then apparently he said did some calculations and got this 34 feet forward, 53 feet, then back to its spot that it started, and then 53 more feet backwards with a total of 87 feet in reverse. So that is that part of his calculation, which makes no sense to me. But I'm just reporting on what was talked about. Um, then he gets to talking about where is that he matched up what I wanted. That's when he was scanning 34 Fairview. Oh, here's his collision impact stuff. Okay. So then we're going to get into him doing the scanning of the and putting 30 or One Meadows, and how it would look. And he says that this is what it would look like when the Karen at that 507 when she left John O'Keefe's house and ended up hitting John O'Keefe's Chevy Traverse, that this is how the vehicle would be positioned. And he says that Karen Reed's taillight wouldn't have hit John O'Keefe's Traverse. That's what he says. You can make your own conclusion. He talks about snow being knocked, and that's how we can tell that they were hit. And these are the different s this is the snow disruption, apparently. I don't think these scans are that great. Again, showing some lining up and some damage. And then he talks about that he followed the snow tracks to when John O'Keefe left. Something I noticed, though, is when they did the Karen Reed leaving, they made sure they didn't play parts of the video that would show where her taillight is lit up red. But look how red all of this is with her backing in reverse. Then we get to um let's take this down for a minute. Um we'll get to that in just a second. Okay. So he talks about Karen Reed's Lexus taillight didn't hit John O'Keefe's Traverse. He said he showed his 2D recreation of the backing up event, that there are scratches on the lower part of Karen Reed's SUV, but no damage to John O'Keefe's car. And that can be explained in two different ways. Could it be that Karen Reed's vehicle, when she ran into John Chevy Traverse, that there was no damage? Or remember, Jen McCabe mentioned that there was a car repairman at John O'Keefe's house the day after everything happened. So, did the car repairman fix that so that when they came out, they could be like, see, there's no damage. She didn't hit her car here, and that's not how she broke her taillight. I would like to know if the repairman fixed some damage on John's Chevy Traverse before anybody saw it and got to take pictures. Or did it really not have damage? And then for one of the craziest experiments that I think I have seen for an accident reconstruction. I remember hearing something in Motions or on Twitter about there being some paint test, and there was finger painting or something like that that Welcher was going to do, and the defense was trying to get Welcher's he was trying to get it to where Welcher couldn't testify because they said he was not qualified and all of that. After this test, and some other things that have happened throughout the trial, I might actually agree with the defense. Why did this guy testify? What was his purpose for testifying? Was he a hired gun or is he telling the truth? You get to decide if this guy, because this guy is the guy that the Commonwealth's case basically hangs on. This is the guy that's supposed to prove to everybody that there was a collision with Karen Reed's Lexus to John O'Keefe's arm, leaving those abrasions on his arm from the taillight, and then being thrown backwards to the side, landing on the lawn, and hitting his head on frozen ground and having that skull fracture injury that basically that blunt force trauma injury to the back of his skull. A car had to do this, and this is the guy that's supposed to prove that to us. And he did some tests, and there is paint involved. Um, he paints the taillight blue with some type of grease paint or something. He also makes sure that he has John O'Keefe's exact hat, John O'Keefe's hoodie. They're not John O'Keefe's, they don't belong to John O'Keefe. He bought the things that were exactly like John O'Keefe's stuff. He bought the orange undershirt. I don't know if he bought the exact same jeans or not. I don't know if he wore a belt. I don't remember that part. He bought the same shoes that John O'Keefe was wearing that night, and he got a glass that was just like the one that they use at the Waterfall Bar and Grill. And so he dressed himself up like John O'Keefe. I don't I don't know if I necessarily like this, but can I dog on it as much when we find out that Arca bought at least the hoodie shirt and put it on a test dummy to look at it. They did not dress up like the victim. They just put the victim I think they might have bought the same shoes and had a pair of jeans. Whether they were the same jeans or not, I don't know. Um, I don't remember if they did the hat. We'll get to that when we get to it. But Arca dressed up their dummy like John O'Keefe, whereas Welcher dressed himself as John O'Keefe. I don't know. Some things I could see why, like, making sure your height and if you're wanting to see certain things. For Arca, I understood buying things, and Arca bought multiple, like, hoodies because they needed to change the hoodie every time they did a test. But Welcher, he used himself because he says he's, like, 6 foot, um, 1 or 6 foot and a half, like, not quite 6'1". He's, like, a half an inch shorter than maybe John O'Keefe. He's around 200 pounds, so he says he weighs about the same. So he just used himself, and then the shoes, okay, they might be good for looking at the height if you're the same size, the thickness of a shoe can make you taller or shorter. Um, so I could understand that. I guess a hat could do the same thing. Baseball hat, not usually, but And so I was like, "Okay." And then the hoodie, and as you could see in one of the pictures where he's holding the glass with his arm, it's in the upper right-hand corner. You see him holding the glass and lining his arm up to the tail light, and that it's like, "Oh, see, it aligns, like, they matchy match." This could be how John O'Keefe was hit. This is without the car moving. This is just lining things up to be like, "See." And if you were gonna show that and you were gonna wear the hoodie to show markings that the taillight could cause onto the hoodie, okay. I am not sure why he bought the hoodie because in his paint test, he doesn't even use the hoodie. He, as you can see, is in the orange shirt with his sleeve rolled up because he doesn't want to get paint on this hoodie, I guess. So I don't know the purpose of buying the hoodie now other than to look like the victim, which why buy it if it's not a part of your testing? It it doesn't make sense. So you see him lining things up, all right? Here is where he painted the taillight blue, and when he matched himself up or whatever, he says, "Look, the the spot where the paint got on me from the taillight is the same spot that John O'Keefe's arm markings are on." Okay. What this doesn't tell me, in my opinion, is that the it does not tell me the direction of how those scrapes from an intact tail light at that, how those scrapes would go. So you're just like, okay, you could get it can hit you in the vicinity. And interesting enough, there it looks to be it actually only covers part because John O'Keefe still has markings in between this blue and yellow paint here. The yellow paint is meant to show the bruise on John O'Keefe's hand, I guess, and his drinking glass. I don't know. He could have done this test differently, but he's like, no, like it would leave those lacerations because when I straighten out my arm, they would see they all go, when I straighten my arms out, they all go the same direction. And it's like, yeah, but when you did your test, your arm was bent 90 degrees. So they're not all the same direction. But okay. So then we get to his test, and he's going to back the car into himself at 2 miles an hour, or somebody's going to drive the car into him at 2 miles per hour. So his arm is clean. He's got yellow paint on his hand, I guess, to see if he's going to do the thing. So let's press play and watch this. Okay, now they're playing it. Ah, I don't know what he's doing here. All right, let's see here. Are they going to play it? Okay, now they're going to He rolls into it. Yeah, he just rolls into it. Rolls his arm into it. Let's see if we can change if we change the speed, let's slow it down. Alright, so here it is, rolls into it, and he gets the paint on him. I I don't think John O'Keefe rolled into the car. I don't think this is accurate at all. And then he has the yellow on him, but I don't end up seeing. Oh, okay, I do see yellow here over here on this other long red piece. When his arm is out like that and he rolled into it, this is where the glass in his hand and knuckles or whatever, his hand would have hit to get this yellow paint here, which he's saying. And then if you go over here to this picture of Karen Reed's Lexus in the Sally port and you see the scraping that's way above where this long red piece of taillight that's intact, if your hand hits the long piece of red, I don't know how the drink did this scratch. But okay, Welcher. This is how he said he proved that the taillight scratched John O'Keefe and hit him. He only did 2 miles per hour because if he would have done a faster speed, um, one, it would have hurt him, and he's not gonna have somebody back into him at 24 miles an hour, but also it would destroy the exemplar Lexus because they are going to sell it, and whatever the difference is in the buying price and the selling price, that's what they're gonna charge the Commonwealth for it. So they don't want to damage the exemplar Lexus because 'cause they're not planning on keeping it. They're gonna sell it once they're done with all their tests. And then this slide also shows that he said, "I eyeballed the lacerations in connection with where he would have scratched him." And he's like, "See these 2 parallel here with the circles? And then if you draw lines, it will line up to make these scratches at these different points." I don't know if that actually makes any sense either, but okay. And when you find out how much these people are getting paid, it is ridiculous. And so somehow I don't know why he brought in these things. And you know, Hank Brennan was complaining in Arca's testimony about opinions being on PowerPoint slides. Look at the title of Welcher's thing: Laceration on John O'Keefe's arm and forearm from a Lexus impact. That's an opinion. And Arca was not allowed to have that when they testified. So that is his paint test. And that is one of the only tests. And he said, the taillight shattered and that's how they went everywhere. Took into consideration all these pieces of evidence. He cites to a case from 1979 about head injuries. Mm, um, shows the brain injury, but to me, he's not qualified to talk about that. Then he does do a crash test dummy drop test. Where did he go? All right, let's see here. All right. So he is holding the crash test dummy or rescue doll, and he's just letting it fall backwards. And then he's got sensors and stuff connected to the head and everything to see what happens when if John O'Keefe was just to fall backwards. And he goes over the he didn't really go over the data. I think Brennan asks about what this is, but they never talk about this chart above that video we just watched. He talks about this other chart about experimental skull fracture things from something. Um, but he doesn't talk about what the results of his drop testing was. And so that is pretty much his direct examination. Then we get to Cross, and Alessi asks him if he has seen Trooper Paul's report. Um, and he says that he hasn't, but he has. He has seen Trooper Paul's report because he has used information from Trooper Paul. But Commonwealth does not want that in because they do not want the defense to be able to ask him about data that they're using from Trooper Paul. So they're not allowed to ask questions about Trooper Paul's report and information they got from him. He asks him, "Did you know that the incident happened on January 29th, 2022?" Because Burgess seemed to have think that that things happened on a different day. Um, that Welcher was hired in September of 2024, and that they put down a $44,500, whether it was a retainer, deposit, whatever. Norfolk County paid that. Um, November 5th, he said he didn't know whether they had paid it or had not paid it, but he knew about the contract. Um, talks about he is the senior VP of Aperture. Um, and they tried to ask him about, "Oh, you don't know when stuff is paid or whatever." He says, "No, it usually takes about 9 to 12 months for somebody to notify him about non-payments because an accounting department handles that, not him, even though he's VP." Um, then they talk about the Lexus and that they were gonna charge the difference between the purchase and the sold price for the Lexus, which is why they didn't wanna damage it. Then he brings up that on April 5th, there was an amendment to the contract that they had, April 5th of 2025. Remember, they were originally hired September 2024. And now, I don't know if it is on top of or including that 44,000 um amount that they put down, but now Norfolk County and the taxpayers, basically, because they're using taxpayer money, is paying Aperture $325,000. The Commonwealth is paying Aperture, Burgess and Welcher, that company, $325,000. And from the reactions of everybody, that is extremely high. Like, experts make money and stuff, and witnesses get paid sometimes, like expert witnesses do, but not at that price. And you've seen what all they have done. If you saw it in the Shannon Burgess video, you saw what he has done. And then we've just gone over the testing that Welcher did. Was that worth over $300,000 worth of testing? Or is it a hired gun? We'll pay you this much if you say what we want you to say. And Aperture has some questionable credibility issues due to the Burgess resume thing and them updating their website and discontinuing links and things like that. Doesn't look like Aperture's been too honest. Whether it's Welcher that's behind some of it or somebody else, to me, it's not a company I would trust based on how they have behaved in this case. Um, and that $300,000 is for 8 months worth of work. Yeah, which is it's insane. And then you compare it to what ARCA got paid by the defense for this trial. Granted, we do not know how much they got paid by the Department of Justice, the DOA, feds, whoever you want to call them. We don't know how much they made off of them, but off of the defense, nothing close to 300K. The defense hadn't even paid him for the. If you add the defense and what they paid ARCA for trial 1 and trial 2, the defense didn't even pay him $100,000. I don't know what the DOJ paid them on top of what the defense paid him, but it's just very interesting when we get to compare what ARCA did in comparison to what Welcher did and who got paid more. So then they move into, you created your PowerPoint on January 30th. Um, and then he updated it on May 15th after the trial had already started. He talks about that he received Burgess's report on May 8th. Burgess found new information to adjust the times. I don't think he found new information. I think he just continued the math or something and used, as he said, a new method to get these times than what he was doing before. Um, he hasn't submitted an amended report, but has done an amended analysis in the middle of a trial in the past. Um, Talks about, do you know when the defense got the amended PowerPoint, which they got the PowerPoint the day before Memorial Day. And something that keeps going on when Alessi is asking these questions is he keeps looking at his computer. He's messing with his computer. He's trying to go to slides. He's doing all this. And Alessi keeps like having to bring this up to stop looking at the computer. The judge has to tell him, stop looking at your computer, stop looking at your reports. Like, you're not looking at this because we're not reading and doing things. But he continues to do it over and over and over again. So much so that at one point they take away his electronics and make them be put up in his bag, or he can't have his computer open or out, um, which he doesn't like. I think he likes to be in control, but he talks about he doesn't care if data is new or old, just that the data is the data. He has um then he talks about that the EDR system, which is the event data recorder or whatever, doesn't show location or time in the text stream data. It does record by key cycle. And he says if you are wrong on the key cycle and the trip, you won't get the location correct, which is what I have been talking about. But that's as far as they get to go into, well, no, they go a little bit further into key cycles, but it's very short. So he says you do know that key cycles 1164 through 1167 minus key cycle 1166. I don't know why that's, but that is Massachusetts State Police doing their testing. Um, and that's what we get on key cycles. He doesn't get him to admit, he doesn't get him to count key cycles backwards or anything like that. It's just what he says. Um, he says that he got the vehicle at key cycles at a later key cycles, um, and that key cycle 1167 had 10 triggers. They talk about force equals mass times acceleration, and then had him do some calculations, and then asked about the falling backwards test that he did, that seemed to have been about 72,000 pounds of force. Um, talk about only 12.7% of head injuries are fatal. And then in 1979, that head injuries were the most common injury in pedestrian vehicle accidents. And Alessi's like, have you looked at a more recent study than 1979? He's like, no. So Alessi brings up a January 2022 study where a more recent study says that the lower extremities are the most common injury in a motor vehicle versus pedestrian collision. And he says he doesn't know the most recent studies. They ask about the safety systems, um, with autonomic fatal injuries, get into the showing on direct, the drop test, could it give a skull fracture? And Welcher says that John O'Keefe was 7 feet on the grass on the lawn. I don't know where he got 7 feet, because we don't know exactly where John O'Keefe was positioned on the lawn. He only knows that then they talk about the on flat road, that if Lexus and John O'Keefe are both on, like, a flat ground, like the road, that the eyelid and the top spoiler match up to where John O'Keefe could have maybe got his eye laceration or whatever from that spoiler. Others do not agree with that, but this is what Welcher said, they match. That he didn't take into consideration, what if Karen Reed's vehicle was on the road, but John was up on a curb? Would his arm still match with that taillight, or would his eyelid also match with that top spoiler? Or what if and Karen Reed was in the yard and John O'Keefe was on top of a berm, but he didn't take into the consideration of maybe John O'Keefe and Karen Reed's vehicle were not even on the same, level playing field. um, but he said, "Well, I guess John O'Keefe coulda stood on a berm or a curb." Um, he did no calculation of force to the arm. He did no testing of force to the arm to break the taillight or break to show us what it would look like, which we were waiting for. It's like, "Are you gonna show us how these taillight pieces break into all these pieces and how this happened?" I was expecting that. I did not get that. And something that comes into play later on in this case, but we do not know it at this time, is Welcher says that because he says, "Well, you know that John O'Keefe didn't have any broken bones, right? No fractures or damage to his arm other than the superficial abrasions on his arm, his skin." And he says, "Well, we don't have any x-rays of the arm or the hand to determine that, and bones are inside, so we can't see them because they're not on the outside of the body." Well, thank you for bones are inside the body, but I wrote a note next to it that was like, that's interesting," because it was a good point at that time about, well, I mean, technically, that's a reason we could say, "Well, this is why we don't know if there's any breaks because nobody did any x-rays." We find out later, because this is happening on day 22. We find out, like, day 30, day 31, or at least, like, maybe 4 or 5 days later as trial days. 4 or 5 trial days later, there are X-rays. So why is Welcher saying there are no X-rays? Because when those got brought out several days after Welcher's testimony, all of us were shocked. Because 'cause we've never seen X-rays before. It wasn't brought up in the first trial. I understand why the Commonwealth does not wanna bring the X-rays in because they are clean. They are clean X-rays. Clean meaning clear, there's no breakage. It The bones are where they're supposed to be. It doesn't look like there's inflammation or swelling and things like that on these X-rays. But Welcher said, "Well, we don't know if there's any breaks because there was no X-rays of the arm and hand." There absolutely was. I don't know why the defense didn't. Well, they brought it up, but my guess is the reason Alessi did not make a huge, huge deal of it, he made sure to ask him about it when he mentioned it, but he just let Welcher say that. And then he let it come out later for other witnesses, his medical examiner that the defense brings in to bring up these x-rays, to be like, "I'm not even going to give this man a chance to argue it. I will bring in the x-rays in my case in chief." because those x-rays prove the Commonwealth, or not the Commonwealth's case, they prove the defense's case. There was no fractures. There was no other damage to John O'Keefe's right arm other than those abrasions. But the Commonwealth doesn't want to bring that in because then that will show you is actually no breaks. This is what it looked like. That's not good for their case. They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to bring it in. But did Welcher lie about there not being x-rays when he knew there were x-rays? And did Hank Brennan know there were x-rays and just didn't give them to Welcher to consider? It's just interesting as to why this expert, for some reason, and he viewed autopsy stuff, he said he never saw x-rays of the arm or hand. They were never given to him. Very interesting, but we were all like, "Oh, wow, that's a good point. The Commonwealth could have just scored is the ME didn't even x-ray it. But did she cut it open or whatever?" And then later we find out, no, the ME did her job, and, there actually was x-rays showing there was no breakage. That was really an interesting point at that. We're like, "Okay, Commonwealth scored point there." No, they didn't. It's a huge thing, and it's caused a lot of problems. They go over the 30 feet forward, then 34 feet back, 53, and which is and then another 34 feet forward, then 34 feet back, then 53 more feet back, equaling 87 feet back in reverse. The 30 feet forward was at about 13.6 miles per hour. There was wheel slippage. The 53 more feet was up to 24 miles an hour. Alessi brings up, well, did you know that there was a truck behind Karen Reed's SUV? Or did you know that there was a Jeep that was around the mailbox behind Karen Reed's SUV during this time period that she's supposedly doing this? And he said, well, from my understanding, there wasn't a vehicle there. So she wouldn't have ran into a vehicle. And so it was just Karen Reed's car in front of 34 Fairview when John O'Keefe was hit. Well, that's not what the evidence has said. That's not what testimony from other people has said. And according to testimony, if it happened around 12:31, 12:32, people had their cars parked in front of 34 Fairview. Um, he doesn't think the weather has any play in the scene. Um, he says maybe the car could have been up on the lawn. Um, if we want to go with that particular scenario, I think that the weather could play a huge part. If the road is wet, sometimes your vehicle can slide. If there's snow, or a frozen spot, tires can spin. Um, we did learn that the way that the miles per hour is known on this vehicle is based on the wheel spinach, the miles per hour on the wheel, not necessarily the vehicle itself, but how fast the wheels spin is where we get our miles per hour on this vehicle. So you can be going nowhere and pressing on the accelerator really, really hard, and your tires can just be spinning around and there ain't nothing happening. You're not going anywhere. You're not reversing, even if you're in reverse. Your vehicle's stuck. So then Welcher gets to come back the next day. Alessi continues with his cross. Um, Once again, he tries to get into stuff about Trooper Paul and the medical examiner because he looked at those things and used them in his PowerPoint and to come up with his analysis. But Judge Canoni said, "You cannot ask him about Scorty Bellows stuff, and you cannot ask him about Trooper Paul." Um, Unless he brings up that the Ring camera at John O'Keefe's house at One Meadows has been replaced since the night of the incident, and so the old one and the new one are not necessarily in the same position or direction to capture the way the vehicle would look and run into something. Um, Welcher says that he took that stuff into consideration when he did some math and stuff, which that math is, I don't understand it, but he says that he took it into consideration. He doesn't think that the camera models are important because um, he has video footage from each of the cameras and a that laser scanned and can correct. Um, he says that the bumper glass, he thought that the test was inconclusive. No, that bumper glass test was not inconclusive. The glass on the bumper did not match the glass that John O'Keefe was holding in his hand, as you so say. So, what is your explanation? Is if John O'Keefe was holding a glass and you say he got hit by a car, where did those glass pieces from the bumper come from if it did not come from the glass? You're saying he was holding a glass and he gets hit, or let's say he got hit, the glass would shatter, some of it would fall on the bumper possibly, but the bumper and the glass in the cup or whatever, they don't match. It's very interesting. Was that glass planted? Um, so I don't think he has the right information on that either. Is it because he can't remember, or is he just told something wrong? Does he even have the report? Um, Says that the taillight didn't come into contact with John O'Keefe's traverse. They talk about, even though Karen reads, the taillight thing, her stuff sticks out. He said it wouldn't have hit it. I showed you where it looks like it aligns. You let me know what you think. Um, then they get into talking about the hydraulic system on the Lexus, and that there are five different um, levels of suspension that the Lexus could be in. And there's a difference when the car is in park versus it being on. It'll it'll lower when it's parked and turned off, and it'll rise when the car is turned on. Interesting. Did he take into consideration that when measuring where things line up? He's he says, it could be a 5-inch different, a 3 high or a 2 low. Um, he didn't test the suspension. He says he doesn't care the number. He just matched to the Sally port. So whatever it was when it was sitting in the Sally port, that's what it was when he did it. Well, don't you think you maybe want to look at that, at what the setting is? Just to write down, okay, it's at a 3, so that means when it's in park, it goes down to a 2 or something? But he doesn't care about the number. He just matched it and lined it up with the metal pieces. Okay. Um, there's some question about suspension locks with the infotainment tests. And Alessi, says the tech stream data, infotainment system data, none of the data that you got from the Lexus shows that there was a collision that registered. And Welcher said, correct. There was not a collision that was registered um, at any point during the time that this vehicle has been owned. So Hank Brennan gets back up for redirect. They talk about distributing loads and spreading loads, and how if you were to take like a pen and the force and stuff and like stick it into it, stuff could happen. But if you took like a pin and pushing into it and then a phone pushing into it, the load spread is different, where the pin it's more smaller and more focused, but with the phone the load is spread more. He also talks about sitting on a mattress on the bed, and then you think you can like sink into the mattress, and then he says, and spread your distributed load, which is like too many innuendos, and your mind goes to the gutter possibly. It's okay. There was something to laugh at. It's like, oh, please don't say it like that. And he kept mentioning spreading the load and distributing the loads. And we're just like, please stop. Um, Hank says, well, you don't use Signal, the Signal app for communicating or encrypted apps, right? He says, no, I don't I don't use Signal. And then he's like, well, you don't have confirmation bias, do you? And Brennan, he's not going to say, yes, I have confirmation bias. Every witness, if you say, are you biased? They're going to say no. Um, Now 400K, 300, over 300K in my pocket, he might have some bias. And I don't know what all he did to earn that money, because his tests are not that much. It's just weird. And also, it makes me think that the reason they're making this much money, that might be why Burgess decided to just all willy-nilly continue working on a report and change the timelines in the middle of trial. When most of the time you don't do work unless your client asks you to. But I guess if you have a budget and can be paid over $300,000, I guess you can do things willy-nilly because it's just covered. It just covers anything you wanna do when you wanna do it. When most experts are like, "I'm not gonna do a test without being asked, because I'm not gonna do a test if I'm not gonna be paid for it. So why would I do extra work for possibly no money?" But Aperture knew, with the amount of money that they were getting, that they could do basically all that they could within that amount of money. It just explains things and puts them in a different light, because that was the thing with Burgess. Why are you doing work all willy-nilly? Then Welcher comes in, and we hear about the money they're making, and we're like, "That makes sense." It's weird because it's not how it usually goes, but it makes sense. Then on recross or recross, there was lots of back and forth. Um, Alessi says, "Did you start with the hypothesis that John O'Keefe wasn't hit by a car?" Um, and he talked about, by assumptions and his evidence to reach that Karen Reed um, hit John O'Keefe. And he's like, "No, I don't start with a hypothesis or a question." And it's like, "Sir, we learned the scientific method in elementary school. You most definitely need to know why you're there, where you're like, okay, I need to, if your hypothesis is yes, a tail light driven back at 24 miles an hour could cause the injuries to John O'Keefe's arm, that's your hypothesis for that particular test." And then you do the test and you're like, "No, it didn't do it here, but yes, it did it here." Or, "Yes, it can happen, but these were the injuries that we saw." But your first question should be not, "How did this like, let me show you John O'Keefe was hit by a car," but it should be, "Do the injuries line up with the car? Does this car hitting somebody at this speed and all this stuff line up? Was there a collision?" Shouldn't that be the first question? Was there a collision? Then figure that out. And then if you say, "Yes, there was a collision," okay, how did this collision happen? And then come up with a hypothesis, test that hypothesis, and keep going until you figure out what happened. That was not done here. Um, and then when he was wrapping up and they were wanting to get to his final conclusion, Hank Brennan was like, "Based on all this data and literature, your your conclusion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty that the Lexus struck John O'Keefe on January 29, 2022 at 12:32 a.m." And he was like, "Yes, that is consistent with what had happened." But he also added in, "And that is what happened." Well, sir, you don't get to determine that is what happened. The jury does. Now, ARCA has an expert that's like, "I don't believe this is what happened." He doesn't say, "This is not what happened." He says, "I believe this is not what happened," or these things do not add up to be consistent with. But that was a huge thing at the end of his, and getting his opinions, is he was like, "And this is what happened. Trust me, John O'Keefe got hit by the car. I am saying that, and I proved that." Y'all let me know if what y'all think if he proved. He was supposed to come up for rebuttal. The Commonwealth decided not to put him up for rebuttal, and he was the last witness for the Commonwealth's case. Um, and we have pretty much covered all of our witnesses. I will put up a little bit. I still need to. I have to upload the video of the Karen Reed's BAC level, her alcohol, DUI, drunkenness calculations, and the blood draw from Good Samaritan. I have that one to put up. And then a person that was with Karen Reed in the ambulance. I don't think I've done that one. And I have to get those uploaded. But other than that, that is the Commonwealth's case. And so next we'll be getting into the defense witnesses. Hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Sorry this one was so long. Bye.